A train departs for its destination at night. The passengers there hope they can arrive at their destination safely. But that night they actually get into terrible trouble until one by one they start to disappear. So what happens? At the beginning of the film, there is a man named Joe. He works at a train company and becomes one of the train attendants. Joe is very dedicated to his work. He is even willing to work overtime and to get a higher position in order to advance his career. But unfortunately, that hope must be dashed. At that time, he received a letter requesting to become a supervisor, but unfortunately the application was still rejected. According to the company, Joe still has to work harder to reach the supervisor level. On the other hand, one of his friends who is arrogant and rarely comes in actually gets the supervisor position. That certainly makes him a little jealous. His friend named David orders Joe to work overtime tonight, because one of their members is sick, so Joe has no choice but to replace him, even though Joe has just finished his work hours. That night, he should have been at home and on his soft mattress, but he still has to accompany the passengers who will leave that night. Joe began approaching the passengers to ask them to show their tickets. The trip would take hours. The train would stop at stations to disembark and pick up passengers. At that time, one of the passengers named Kate forgot her ticket, so Joe had to withdraw some money from Kate in exchange. And of course, Joe got scolded by Kate because she felt that this was just a small mistake. Besides that, there was also a young woman named Ellen who seemed impolite and indifferent to Joe. It seemed that Joe was not alone. He was accompanied by a woman who had been his target, Nina. Nina worked offering food and drinks to passengers. In between, Joe was happy and tried to talk to her. He also dared to invite Nina to dinner together when their train arrived later. But unfortunately, the invitation was politely rejected by Nina. Maybe Nina already had a boyfriend or she was not interested in Joe's invitation. After checking the passengers' tickets, Joe tried to rest until the next stop. That night would be a long journey for them. A few hours later, suddenly their train stopped suddenly. Joe woke up from his sleep and checked what happened. At first, Joe felt something was wrong, but the engineer said they were having problems and he would check where the error was. The train cabin lights went out and only the emergency lights were on. Meanwhile, the engineer got off the train and tried to find out the cause. Their train stopped in the middle of the wilderness. It was raining and cold. Meanwhile, Joe helped the passengers who were still on the train. Some of them seemed to have difficulty finding their belongings. Joe tried to contact the engineer, but there was no answer because the engineer was not on the train. The engineer found a large deer under one of the train cars. How could the deer be there? When he was going to check the deer, the engineer felt something from behind the bush. Maybe it was just another deer passing by, but it turned out to be something terrible. The engineer was attacked until his blood spurted onto one of the car windows. Only the passengers didn't realize it. They had been waiting for several minutes, but the train still hadn't started. Joe and Nina started to get a little suspicious. They went into the driver's room and didn't find the engineer. This made them wonder. Joe tried to look outside the train but didn't see anyone. They tried to contact the nearest station, but the network was bad. Joe had to lie to the passengers that everything was fine and under control. The engineer was trying his best so they could move again, but they didn't believe him. The situation was getting out of control, but one of the men named Adrian shouted loudly to stay calm. Adrian felt something was wrong, so he suggested they just walk, especially since the nearest station was about 3 kilometers away. At first, Joe didn't want to open the door, but because he was urged, he finally opened the door and they started walking. The rain had eased outside. It would be easy for them to walk to the station, but they wouldn't know what danger was lurking. They started walking side by side and staying together. But many times, one of them, Matt, felt something following them from the bushes, and it was getting closer. Joe asked them to stop while he would check the situation. Joe was shocked to see the train driver's body in a terrible state, his intestines hanging out as if eaten by something. Nina also saw it. Joe then asked them to immediately return to the train. Not long after, they heard the sound of a wolf howling in the dark night and the full moon. They all got on the train, but Joe still had to wait for the elderly couple who were left behind, Jeet and Jenny. Jeet managed to get on while Jenny's leg was still left outside when the door closed. Then something pounced on Jenny's leg, causing her leg to be badly injured, and there were bite marks. They felt there was something out there and it looked like a wild animal. Since the incident, Kate asked Joe what really happened and where did the engineer go. Joe didn't dare to answer. Then there was a loud noise from one of the train cars. Joe, Adrian, and a young man named Billy tried to find out what it was. The sound came from the toilet, and when it was opened, it turned out to be a fat man who had just urinated. It turned out he had been trapped in the toilet all this time. Unfortunately, he also missed the station that should have been his destination. On the other hand, Kate saw the wound on Jenny's leg that was getting worse. She had to be taken to the hospital immediately. Then she talked to a young woman named Ellen. She looked scared and wanted to go home. She just missed her mother. Kate, who was also a mother, tried to calm her down that everything would be fine. But soon something came again to terrorize them. Suddenly, Ellen's cell phone rang. She picked it up. Then from outside a monster came in, grabbed Ellen and ate her outside the train. They all became panicked and hysterical. Since the incident, they gathered in a carriage near the engineer's carriage. They closed the windows as best they could to hold back the monster's attack. Now they can only wait until morning comes. But Jenny probably won't be able to wait that long. Until finally Jenny vomits a large amount of something, including her teeth. What happened to her? In between, Joe felt a member missing, and it turned out to be the fat man. He was in the toilet and was urinating again. Like it or not, Joe had to go to him to immediately reunite with them. But at that time, the fat man couldn't open the toilet door again because it was jammed. He tried many times but failed until the monster's attack appeared and finished off the fat man. Joe saw from between the doors, and now he was in danger. He had to hurry back with the others, because behind him a werewolf appeared from inside the toilet. The barrier couldn't hold the werewolf. They panicked, but because Joe dared to attack him, the others also joined in the attack, until finally the werewolf died. Why was there a werewolf in that area? And it turned out that there wasn't just one werewolf. Here they just realized that Jenny was bitten by a werewolf and would likely become like them. Adrian felt that Jenny had to be finished off now, otherwise she would transform and come back to prey on them all. But Joe stopped him because he was not sure about Adrian. Adrian was tied up so he wouldn't act up and Kate would keep an eye on him. Meanwhile, Joe, Nina, and Billy were trying to start the train's engine. Billy knew a little about engines, so he went down with Matt to find out where the problem was. Billy managed to find a leaking fuel hose and some broken electrical wires. As Billy started repairing, Matt heard a cry for help from the forest. The voice sounded like Ellen's. Unfortunately, it was just a trap. Matt was surrounded by 3 werewolves and killed right then and there. Meanwhile, Joe saw the electricity and the train starting to work. When they turned on the lights, there were 2 werewolves standing in front of the train. Nina panicked and started the train without waiting for Billy to get on. As a result, Billy hung under the train, holding on there. On the other hand, Jenny had completely transformed into a werewolf. Adrian asked Kate to let her go so he could help them, but the problems grew. A werewolf appeared and caught Kate. Instead of helping, Adrian kicked Kate out of the train, resulting in Kate not surviving being attacked by the werewolf. Inside the train, Jenny killed Jidin and cornered Adrian. Then for some reason, their train stopped again. It turned out that the fuel hose connection was leaking again. Joe and Nina came out of the control room and killed Jenny. Joe should have also killed Adrian, because he acted up again by leaving Joe and Nina in the train where there were already werewolves. When cornered, Billy comes and tries to burn them and asks Joe to open the door, but unfortunately Billy doesn't succeed. Joe and Nina manage to escape into the forest, but Joe asks Nina to keep running alone. Joe will be bait for the werewolf. Joe sacrifices himself for Nina. Nina arrives at the station in a mess while holding Joe's badge. Meanwhile, Adrian meets Joe, who has become a werewolf, and pounces on him.